Thank you very much. Good morning, Center Cafe. Thank you so much for inviting me here to talk about coffee consolidation. This is a topic that obviously affects the entire value chain, and this has news flow that you can't avoid every week, every month. There's a new deal. So I want to give my perspective on what's going on in coffee consolidation. Just a little bit about where I come from at Rabobank. We're a Dutch bank that focuses almost primarily on the food and agriculture sector outside of the Netherlands. So it gives us a unique perspective on what's going on. Within coffee, that means we talk to everybody from the farmer straight up to the biggest brand owner. I'm in the research group there. This means that we tackle the kind of biggest strategic issues for our companies and consumer trends that are affecting our topics. I work in the beverages research group. We're a global group. We cover all of the beverages, and that's relevant to what we're going to talk about today with all the M&A in coffee, because one of the things I really want to talk about is what we can learn from what's happened in beer over the last 10 years and the consolidation we've seen in the beer market and how that plays into what we might see going forward in coffee, and as well as what happens at the brand owner level in coffee and how that cascades down throughout the entire value chain. So what consolidation for a brand owner means to a trader, a farmer, a roaster. You can see from the slide, there's no shortage of activity in M&A in coffee. And I picked 2012 to start really because that's pretty much when Jab started buying up coffee, which is the genesis of this presentation and a lot of what's going on in coffee today. So I want to talk to you about the themes we can take from what Anheuser-Busch InBev, ABI, Anheuser-Busch InBev has done in beer and what that would look like in coffee. So Anheuser-Busch InBev, 20 years ago was a small Brazilian brewer that through mergers became the leader in Brazil, then merged into Europe, now accounts for 30% of the world's beer. So things can happen really fast. The thought that a small Brazilian company is the world leader in 20 years. This M&A is contagious. Once one company starts, every company recognizes this, and you see the number 2, 3 players fighting just as hard to keep up. The pressure on suppliers. So brand owners get bigger, their leverage grows. How does the next wave of suppliers, distributors respond? And we've seen in beer a massive amount of consolidation among distributors and key suppliers to the brewers. Best practices spread quickly. In beer, that was zero-based budgeting. This is an idea that came from that Brazilian base and is now practiced in some form by about half of the S&P 500. So ideas take off quickly. What does that mean in coffee? Well, if you were going to look at the Jab model and take something for yourself, it might be how you treat your financing with your suppliers and your ability to take a few extra days payable. And the last bit that we're going to learn from what happened in beer is local brands become a platform for global brands. So this has happened kind of across the world in beer, that you have a great mainstream brand that becomes your way to take a wonderful export brand from one of your key markets and gain distribution and really grow the top line that way. So why am I talking so much about Anheuser-Busch InBev? I think of these 3 companies as a 3-headed monster. So the connection here is the founders and largest stakeholders of Anheuser-Busch InBev are the guys who started 3G, which owns the Kraft Heinz portfolio. Jab, the 2 of the partners of JEB, are the current and former chairman of Anheuser-Busch InBev. They have both similarities in their playbook in approaching M&A, but also the actual people running all of these organizations. So that's why I think it's a very appropriate comparison to make. This is what beer looked like 10 years ago. And I picked this because 10 years ago is before, it's still called InBev then, before they had made a number of their acquisitions, but they had gotten large enough and they had become the largest beer company. Oh, what's worth noting is that outside of the Chinese companies on this list, every single company either was acquired or made a number of major acquisitions. So InBev bought the number 2 SAB, the number 3 Anheuser-Busch, the number 6 Modelo. They bought everybody, but Heineken has equally made 4 to 5 major acquisitions in that time, going into Asia, going into Brazil, consolidating Europe. So once consolidation starts, the landscape will look completely different in 10 years. I think this is a similar place, perhaps not exactly, but to where we are in coffee today, so beer in 2007. What does this mean on a numbers basis? So you can talk about consolidation. Anheuser-Busch InBev, when I started, so 2007, a little under 20 billion in annual revenue, now over 45 billion. Gross profit, EBITDA, both up approximately 2.5 times over that size. So one of the ways you can think about it is, think about your biggest customer. Today, are you ready for your biggest customer, the brand owner, to be 2.5 times that size in 10 years? You might not be, and that might be a little scary. So this is what the coffee market looks like. This is Euromonitor data. So this is just really at-home retail coffee. So this doesn't include kind of any coffee to restaurants or hotels. No Starbucks stores in here. So it's a specific market, but I want to just illustrate where we are. The massive number of players between 1 and 3 is probably not a sustainable, long-term, market structure. So I do see a buyer be bought atmosphere in coffee, and I don't think just the way that the beer market does not look anything like the 2007 version. In 10 years, the coffee brand's marketplace will not look anything like it does today. When I think about acquisitions, one of the ways you acquire is, so the markets are still very regional. I picked North America and Western Europe for this because traditionally they're two of the more similar across other beverages. They're very similar. In coffee, they look nothing alike. And at the same time, regionally, the companies are very different. It's also worth noting that the styles of coffee are completely different across the region. So here, North America and Western Europe look the same, very heavy in pods, whereas all of Asia and Eastern Europe, very heavy into instant. What I just take from that is consolidation happens on a very specific combination of both, taking regional leaders and consolidating them into a global player, and building out a portfolio, having all the different, production types of coffee for consumers. This is, coffee consolidation at the top across coffee. So this is the same, at-home, non-retail coffee market. And just to see what it looks like across different markets, the level of consolidation, top 3 and top 10. The bottom compares coffee to the rest of the beverage world. You can see carbonated soft drinks, so that's all Coke, Pepsi, fine. They're going to take over they've taken over the entire world. So coffee here on the bottom, if we did include, retail, if we did include the, so that's Starbucks, but if we included all restaurants and hotels, would probably even look a little bit less consolidated. Those can be different players across different markets. But take this where it is, and let's think about where beer is. They may not look too massively different on this chart. But if coffee were to emulate beer right now, or move that way, you would see, so coffee, top 10 players are a little over 40% of the total market, and in beer, that's a little over 60%. So picture in 10 years, an additional 20% of the coffee that you as a roaster would sell to a brand owner going to a top 10 player. It's a massive shift. And I think, if it becomes like beer, it could be even more of a shift than that. So there's always deals to talk about in this industry. Even my Farmer Brothers one, I could probably have updated to Boyd's because more keeps going on. But I wanted to highlight these deals because each one takes a different sort of level of the value chain and illustrates what's going on there. This Sucafina taking a stake in a Brazilian farm. So the trading houses operate with a very small part of the value, sort of the value pie in coffee. And, one of the ways you think, okay, what can you do through M&A to expand that? Because it's much easier than simply building out organic growth at that level. It's very hard for a trading house to move into branded coffee. It both butts up right against their competitors, and it's a totally different skill set running, sort of either a logistics-based delivery business, to retail or to actually owning a brand. So I think of farms as kind of a core way to get into it, to move into M&A, although buying farms is necessarily very small. And one of the things I want to take this moment talking about farms to think about is the power dynamics that come with coffee consolidation. So already the vast majority of farmers in the world, with 1 or 2 hectares are totally, out-leveraged by the bigger players. This only gets worse with coffee consolidation. There's virtually no route for farms to consolidate at anywhere near the speed that big corporations can do this. This is sort of it takes money to grow, and it's farms would be at the bottom of the S curve in terms of growing. So coffee consolidation is certainly a risk for them, but I expect to see a little bit more of trading houses moving into the farm level to capture more of the value chain, and because that's really the route available to them. On Lavazza buying Kicking Horse, I thought this was interesting. So Lavazza is one of those players in that hot coffee market share that was at 1 to 3 that has fully acknowledged the buyer be bought mentality of the coffee market and made a big play for a truly premium global brand. So when it said that local brands become a platform for global brands, that's what Lavazza is doing here. They're going to take Kicking Horse, but the point of Kicking Horse is not its success in Canada. The point of Kicking Horse is to be able to take that brand and bring it across all Lavazza markets. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. For Farmer Brothers and the roasters, this is the level of the value chain that's probably most immediately directly affected by a consolidation of brand owners, their direct customers. I expect to see a fair amount of consolidation at this level. Scale and leverage when you talk to your customer is one of the most important negotiating parameters. And so as your customers get much bigger, you have to get bigger. In beer, we have seen, as Anheuser-Busch has gotten really big, to take an example from the US, of their distributors, all the 1, 2, and 3, the number 1, 2, and 3 players, distributors in the US have all bought other top 10 distributors, and in often cases multiple other top 10 distributors. So this is, when you are playing up against the big brand owner, you need to scale up yourself. Why can you do this as a roaster? So the example, especially the 3 alcohols across the bottom, are examples of brands that have been very successful with consumers that have all been done through either third-party brewing or third-party distilling and aging. Consumers broadly are really fine with wherever your product was produced. This is not talking about the origin. So this in coffee would not apply to the origin of the coffee, but would apply to the processing stage of it. Goose Island, a wonderful craft beer that Anheuser-Busch has had a lot of success with, you may think of as this great product native to Chicago, but the one you're likely to have now is just as likely brewed in the Anheuser-Busch Newark Airport brewery. So whatever provenance you might have attached to the Chicago heritage of that brand, the consumers are fine with the production side of it. Sam Adams, biggest craft brand in the U.S., built through third-party brewing initially. Bullet Rye was all done in, kind of a nameless plant that did every other rye whiskey brand for a long time in Illinois. So what does matter? What does it matter for coffee? If you as a roaster can provide the flexibility, scale, quality control, you don't need to provide the story. You don't need to be in-house for consumers to respond to that. So Barry Callebaut probably belongs better on this slide. All of our beverage companies have gone asset light. So that means if you're a brand, this is at the brand owner level, if you're a brand owner, you don't need production capabilities. That isn't what you do. A brand owner is a marketing machine. They worry about distribution and really just building the equity and the connection with consumers. So if you're a brand owner in coffee today, why would you roast? And this actually goes back to Townsend from McDonald's talking about how they get all their coffee from roasters. That is a vision of the future where I expect the industry to continue moving in a way where all of the roasting is done by increasingly large centralized roasters who all have by far the technical capability to handle all the different roast profiles and to handle probably better than smaller roasters and better than in-house the proper flexibility and quality control necessary to support a big brand. So the Coke and Pepsi examples are just they've both been going asset light. Coca-Cola refranchised the entire U.S., moving all of its production off to related but independent companies. The Pepsi example is explicitly using a third-party company to do a massive amount of the production, precisely to provide that flexibility and to get the assets off their own books. We didn't forget about Nestle Blue Bottle. This is a very interesting deal. First of all, $500 million for their 70-80% stake in Blue Bottle is, quite an expenditure for a relatively new brand. But if I think about what this means at the brand owner level, again, like Kicking Horse, this is another example of buying a global brand. So what is Nestle has global brands. They're one of the few. If I think of the truly most global brands in coffee, you have Nescafe, Nespresso, you have Starbucks. These guys have that. Blue Bottle is one of the few companies that in third wave in the U.S. that's also had success in Japan, so it already has a little bit of that global appeal, and they obviously think they can take that. But it's about building out a portfolio as well. So if you think about what does it mean to be a large brand owner, you can't just come out and say, we're going to be the largest company and we're only going to do roast and ground, or we're only going to do mainstream roast and ground. That's only going to get you so far with your retailers, with your consumers. Broadly across the beverage world, a portfolio approach is necessary. So that means you cover all the different styles of product, but you also cover all the different price points. So Nescafe and Nespresso come in at one price point. Blue Bottle is completely different. Lavazza comes in at one price point. Kicking Horse is far above that. So this means that no matter what kind of location or occasion you're going for, you have the right product to get in there. It's also aggressive because ready-to-drink coffee is a very young category. So I expect to see a lot more consolidation in this space. We've seen recently a massive wave of new entrants into the ready-to-drink coffee world, where it had traditionally been Starbucks in the U.S. and Coca-Cola with Georgia in Japan, which is kind of by far the global market leader. But really, ready-to-drink coffee has only been in the U.S. and Japan. So this is Nestle saying, hey, wait a second, there's actually for once an emerging new category in coffee. Let's get in right at the beginning and let's try to take this over. I won't get too much into the e-commerce, but our beverage companies are all looking more at that. So if you buy somebody who has got a little expertise in that space, that's a wonderful and relevant thing. So I keep talking about global brands. So this is from the first quarter, but most quarters look the same. The top three are what ABI has called their global brands. So these are the brands that Anheuser-Busch takes into every market in the world. They're all premium, at least outside of their home market. So Budweiser may not be premium in the US, it's premium everywhere else. And this is the core growth strategy. So when you think about Anheuser-Busch is not known as a brand building company, and a vast amount of their financial success in consolidation has come through cost cutting, and they're very, very good at that. But when you think of, okay, but where does can they get any revenue growth? Can they generate any, are there any synergies between all these acquisitions at the revenue side? And there are, and this is what it looks like. These guys, Anheuser-Busch now has a super strong local brand platform in virtually every country in the world. And so that allows them to come in on top of that with these three brands and a few others and achieve growth rates much better than they can with their base beer portfolio. So this is something I expect to see a lot more in coffee. If you think about the Jab portfolio, and they really haven't integrated yet anywhere near the way ABI has, but they have all those pieces of the super high-end U.S. Intelligentsia, Stumptown, Pete's, to go with the other brands, to go with the Keurig, the JDE. And then you think about, what does it mean to buy for Jab to buy Supergroup in Asia? Well, a move like that is a classic way of building out the mainstream portfolio that serves as your base to then bring in your higher-end European brands, your higher-end U.S. brands, and really capture the revenue side of that. So it's not all about cost savings, but you get real top-line growth through the combination of all your businesses. The final thoughts. So first, Chameleon Cold Brew. Nestle just bought Blue Bottle. I spend a lot of time trying to convince people that ready-to-drink coffee is going to be a big deal. Some people naturally believe me. Some are more skeptical. If you don't believe me, at least maybe you'll listen to Nestle. These are two major acquisitions in this space. This is a very young space. It's undeveloped, especially ready-to-drink that comes through cold brew. So this is an industry that, a segment that's been sort of traditional coffee in the U.S., Frappuccino, in Japan, more of a traditional brewed coffee. So the cold brew is not only plays in the ready-to-drink, but is entirely a new product to consumers. These guys are making a big bet there. I think that this is an area for a lot more consolidation and, to be honest, a lot more organic growth as well. But what I wanted to say about Nestle, we've talked so much about JEB, and that's the genesis of this, of how they've put sort of $30 billion into coffee and how that puts pressure on everybody. So what happens when the number two or the number one coffee player also gets a little fire lit underneath? So two big changes at Nestle. There's a new CEO. This is a CEO that comes from, as you see the bottom right, a long history of M&A. Traditionally, if you look back, the first chart I had of coffee M&A, there wasn't a lot from Nestle on that 2002 to 2006 period. now we've had two major deals in the last 2 months. I expect further change. Could be considered a sea change for Nestle, and the top is very similar. An activist investor. So this is saying, we expect you as a company to take a new look and a more aggressive look at which brands you own. Where does it make sense to be? Where can you get synergies from buying other companies? So, a guy like Daniel Loeb is going to say, get rid of everything you don't like, but if you are going to be number one in coffee, that requires more than just your history and building one nice new plant and growing your traditional brands. It requires, especially when you're faced with Jab, a very aggressive slate of M&A. So it takes two to tango. I put this here because we talk so much about Jab. If Nestle is finally getting into it, this is what really heats up M&A. We saw SAB Miller try to respond and try to outrun Anheuser-Busch, by buying, Foster's, for example, in Australia. Once you have multiple players engaged in M&A, it becomes quite literally a race. Every available target, you have to get there first because the other guy is going to get there. And obviously, there are more than two companies doing this. So at the brand level, I expect these moves to spark even further aggressive M&A in the coffee space. But I expect, as this pressure trickles down, to see a significantly more larger amount of M&A at the roaster level, because that's, I think it's easier for a roaster to buy another roaster than it would be perhaps for a trading house to buy another trading house. So I see more at the roaster level, and I see and more financial pressure being applied to those roasters that require that change. I see at the trading house level also, further squeeze on, on margins, and that being that push to move down to the farm level. I don't know that farms can consolidate that much. In beer, one of the things that happened is Anheuser-Busch actually paid its best distributors or helped them financially to acquire lesser, less favorable distributors. It's virtually impossible to do that at the farm level. So there's not much of a mechanism for consolidating kind of those small farms. But I see a lot more consolidation coming, and I'll leave it there and say, I don't know if we have time, but if we have some time for Q&A, I'd take that. Otherwise, I'll happily be around and available to answer any of your questions. Thank you.